Good morning, and welcome to Daily 15. It's good to have you back. Today's Daily 15 is titled Williams on One Thought Too Many. Once again, like our last Williams Daily 15, this comes from his paper, Persons, Character, and Morality. It's available in his book, Moral Luck, or you can search for it online and find it somewhere there, available. If you'd like to purchase the book, you can head on over to alifeofthought.com/D15, read the annotations as well, read along with us, and find a link there. Now, today's excerpt is a follow-up from our last one. Here, in this excerpt from Persons, Character, and Morality, Williams discusses how moral thinking, moral ways of thought, moral systems is supposed to figure into our decision-making, and he raises some worries for how it interacts with our relations to other people. Now, Williams has some very cool points here, some of which you might disagree with. Now, remember, my words today are not supposed to be the final words. They're supposed to be the first ones. So if you'd like to join the conversation, head on over to community.alifeofthought.com. You can comment and discuss the Daily 15 for free, so we would love to hear what you have to say. With that out of the way, we can get started with paragraph 1. Williams begins. However, once morality is there, and also personal relations to be taken seriously, so is the possibility of conflict. This, of course, does not mean that if there is some friendship with which his life is much involved, that a man must prefer any possible demand of that over other impartial moral demands. That would be absurd and also a pathological kind of friendship, since both parties exist in the world and it is a part of the sense of their friendship that it exists in the world. But the possibility of conflict with substantial moral claims of others is there, and it is not only in the outcome. There can also be conflict with moral demands on how the outcome is arrived at. The situation may not have been subjected to an impartial process of resolution, and this fact itself may cause unease to the impartial moral consciousness. There is an example of such unease in a passage by Freed. Note for you from me, Freed is just a prominent legal philosopher, so there's a little bit of background. Anyhow, Williams goes on. He says, after an illuminating discussion of the question of why we should give priority of resources to actual and present sufferers over absent or future ones, he writes, quote, surely it would be absurd to insist that if a man could, at no risk or cost to himself, save one or two persons in equal peril, and one of those in peril was, say, his wife, he must treat both equally, perhaps by flipping a coin. One answer is that where the potential rescuer occupies no such office as that of captain of a ship, public health official, or the like, the occurrence of the accident may itself stand as a sufficient randomizing event to meet the dictates of fairness, so he may prefer his friend or loved one. Where the rescuer does occupy an official position, the argument that he must overlook personal ties is not unacceptable. And that's it for paragraph 1, which brings us to our first highlighted phrase. Williams writes, at the beginning, once morality is there and also personal relations to be taken seriously, so is the possibility of conflict. Now, to understand why Williams is discussing the possibility of conflict here, it's going to help us to consider the more broad argument he's trying to make in Persons, Character, and Morality. Now, I take it that one of Williams's core points is that there's something objectionable about the way that utilitarianism and Kantianism require us to put their commands first. They take a sort of priority in our lives. Or perhaps more specifically, he's skeptical of the impartial perspective that these moral views invite us to take on ourselves and on what to do, this sort of impartiality. And then he's doubtful that such an impartial perspective could be the sort of overriding thing that it's sort of dreamt by the moralists to be, that such a perspective could give us concrete answers, answers that are compelling and helpful, always about what to do. Namely, as we discussed and sort of hinted at in the last Daily 15 on Williams, the concern is that the impartial perspective, it sort of requires us to abstract away or step back from the very characters and desires of ours, which give us a reason to go on living in the first place. And this makes sense, right? The impartial perspective is asking us not to be partial, yet to be partial is simply to care about some things or to care about some people more than others. And what could having a character be other than that? Having a set of interests, having a set of people that matter. So it then feels as if we have to choose between a character, having a character, being a person, and following the dictates of morality. Williams's point here in this paragraph then comes in anticipation of a rejoinder from the moralist. And if Williams's worry is that the moralist, the person advocating for this impartial moral system, doesn't leave enough room for love and the personal passions that we require to go on living, that we require to reason or decide to do anything in the first place, importantly, the moralist might simply try to respond that they do have room to provide for all of those things, that there's nothing, it's not as if you have to choose between living a moral life and having partiality, having attachments. Specifically, they're going to try to claim that love or projects or passion, in fact, require morality in some way to be coherent. William says earlier that the goal is to, quote unquote, bring in the things that could possibly conflict with morality, make it as if they were always a part of it, and then the moralist simply gets to claim that there is no conflict, that morality doesn't conflict with having a character or caring about people or caring about things, because the impartial view does not conflict with our ability to love another person. It provides for it, and it will certainly sometimes approve of it. And as nice as that might sound rolling off the tongue, I think what Williams wants to do with this initial sentence is to say that if our personal relationships, or our relationships to our projects and our desires are to have any substance, that's the way he talks about it. If they're to have any substance, there has to at least exist the possibility that they, living and doing right by them, by the people or by the projects or by the desire or your cause, lead us into a conflict with the impartial morality thing to do. And unsurprisingly, when we make this less abstract, it happens to make even more sense. I suppose I could go on and live an impartial life, a perfectly moral one. But what Williams wants to say is that such a life, by definition, would not leave room for the partiality required in real and deep personal relationships. We say that a good friend puts her friends first in some cases. They forgo perhaps other moral commitments to take care of the person that they care about. This is partiality. And if one is to be a friend to another, he will at least need to have a sprinkle of it. And that brings us to our underlined phrase. Williams continues, sort of clarifying. He says, but the possibility of conflict with substantial moral claims of others is there, and it is not only in the outcome. With our underline, however, Williams broadens the scope of his point. He's not making as constrained of a point that we might have initially thought. Right? After all, we might have begun by taking him to think that sometimes the conclusions required by friendship are not the conclusions required by morality. For instance, morality may command me to donate all of my money to charity, whereas being a good friend would have me spend some of it on flowers to give to a person I care about who happens to be performing in a concert or a show. Yet, in this phrase, he seems to be advocating for something a bit stronger, namely that partiality should not only guide the outcomes, but infuse how we think of them and think about them and deliberate in the first place. To get a better idea of what's going on, it's going to help us to work with an example. So let's take one from Williams. A person is forced to decide between saving two people who are drowning. One of them is his wife, and the other not so much. He just does not know this other person. Of course, partiality might require that my wife be the one I save, or be the one who the person saves. And that is the sense in which a personal relationship could conflict with the recommendations of morality with respect to outcomes. But morality might also require that I think about the decision in one way rather than another, that I come to my conclusion about what to do in a specific kind of way. So what this might look like in a case such as the drowning one is morality might require me to give equal weight to both people in deciding who to save. Now, you might have come across this in questions about who should self-driving cars hit, right? If they need to choose. The 5 people who are crossing the street or the 5 people sitting on the sidewalk that are different in some maybe morally relevant way. One common impartial way of thinking goes as follows. The decision about who to hit, the decision about whose lives to end, if you have to end someone's life, should just be a random decision. And it should be random because only in making it a random decision does each person whose life may be ended have an equal chance. Are they afforded an equal value? It's perfectly impartial. And so we flip a coin or we roll the dice. But if morality recommends a way of thinking like this, it's sure to conflict with the proper way of thinking about who to hit from the perspective of a friend. After all, if someone I care about is on the road, or if someone I care about is drowning in the water, more likely than not, I'm not going to extend a second thought to considerations of justice or fairness, right? I'm just going to spring to save the person who I know and love. And put aside whether or not this is morally right or wrong, because that doesn't matter for our purposes, right? Morality can have its opinion about what I should do, but the point is that in this case, the way that a good friend would think about what to do is fundamentally different from the way that a moral person, an impartial moral person at least, would think about what to do. And so there's a conflict. And that brings us to our circled phrase. Williams says where the rescuer does occupy an official position, and again, to remind you, he's quoting from this legal philosopher, Freed here, the argument that he must overlook personal ties is not unacceptable. So again, just to refresh, the thought is normally if you're just a normal person, you can make a decision based on personal ties, but that justification does not work if you are in a position that requires some sort of impartiality, like being an official. Okay. Now, Williams is going to want to start by drawing our attention to a particular feature of the way that Freed is thinking about saving the drowning person. Namely, it seems he's still thinking that morality needs to sign off, that it needs to give one permission to save their partner, in this case, give one permission to save his wife. And it's a matter of justification. It's a moral question that we're going to have to evaluate based on arguments, whether such permission is going to be granted. In this case, it looks like asking whether or not they have a stronger moral obligation based on their capacity as an official or as a ship captain that requires them to put aside their personal ties. And so, again, the moralist is attempting this strategy where they're saying that the very considerations, the personal ties, we believe to conflict with morality, the obligation one has to one's partner. Obligation isn't even the right word here. The feelings that one has towards their partner, which lead them to save their partner rather than some random person. These, the moralist says, don't conflict with morality, but can in fact coexist within it. Morality can subsume these. And so they say something like this. It's okay to be partial because it's moral to be a good friend. As long as you do it in the right cases, you're fine. You're morally justified. But you have to uphold impartiality when it's important. If you're working in an official capacity, impartiality is going to win out. Your justification that might have worked when you were a normal person who just was deciding to save their partner won't work if you're a captain or an official. And so once again, we've returned to this position within which all of our deliberation is mediated by morality. We're allowed to be partial when morality says it's okay. We're allowed to act in service of our projects, in service of the people we care about when morality permits it. But at the end of the day, that decision does not stem from the relationships themselves, but from morality's sign-off. And when morality disagrees, when it says that we cannot be partial, that we must uphold our duties as captains or as elected officials, well, there's no question what we can do. There's no room for conflict because morality has subsumed both the impartial point of view and also the partial one. And it's delimited the cases in which either one is acceptable to use. So once more, the moralist proclaims we are free of conflict, but morality allows for partiality in the right sorts of cases. Now, to say that Bernard Williams is skeptical of this is an understatement. And he's skeptical in a deep way. He wants to say that if we're in the position of deciding who to save, there's already a problem when we turn to morality to ask for permission. Saving a friend or our beloved is just not the sort of thing, he thinks, that a moral theory needs to sign off on. And once again, we need to remind ourselves what his point is, because he's not saying that our friends or our beloveds or our personal projects, the things that we care about, always win, that it's always better to choose those than it is to do the moral thing. That's not his point. His point is simply that in times of conflict, this is not a conflict internal to morality, and it's not a conflict that is decided by the impartial point of view. No, our personal relationships are sure to conflict with our moral obligations. That will happen, and in different cases, different things will win out. Sometimes we'll act and put aside our moral obligations in order to protect the people we love, and other times we might let down a friend. We might not do the things that a good friend would do because impartiality or morality has a hold on us in that case. Williams's point, rather, is that there's not some moral theory that we can appeal to make this decision for us. Whether we decide to listen to Kant or whether we decide to listen to our hearts and save the people that we care about or pursue our core ground projects is a decision that we have to make ourselves. And it's a decision that does not require the sign-off of morality, he wants to say. And that brings us to our second paragraph. Williams begins, perhaps others will have other feelings about this case. But the point is that somewhere, and if not in this case, where, one reaches the necessity that such things as deep attachments to other persons will express themselves in the world in ways which cannot at the same time embody the impartial view, and that they also run the risk of offending against it. They run that risk if they exist at all. Yet, unless such things exist, there will not be enough substance or conviction in a man's life to compel his allegiance to life itself. Life has to have substance, if anything, is to have sense, including adherence to the impartial system. But if it has substance, then it cannot grant supreme importance to the impartial system, and that system's hold on it will be, at the limit, insecure. If only we had another 15 minutes. Did I say something you disagreed with? Do you have anything to add? Join the conversation at community.alifeofthought.com. And if you'd like to mark up the second paragraph for yourself, head on over to alifeofthought.com/D15. Thanks so much for joining us this morning, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.